Why do you think we have the gifts of the Spirit? Do we operate in the gifts of the Spirit? What is the purpose of spiritual gifts, if not to enable us to do the work that brings the glory to God Almighty?
Good evening and welcome to There is a Word. I am Bishop Marcia Dinkins, founder of Black Women Rising, a nonprofit organization that focuses on centering the voices of Black women, and Forever Changed Ministries, a ministry that is without walls. Tonight we will be talking about Black policing before and after, and how faith leaders can help to build bridges to reduce community trauma and lateral violence. I am honored to have with us tonight retired police officer Earl Berry, retired detective Arthur Walker, retired detective Gary Burks, and Reverend Benjamin Green, pastor of the Church of the New Covenant in Toledo, Ohio. Welcome all to this much needed conversation. We are having this conversation so that we can interrogate policing, and at what point did it change? You know, we have moved from a generation of little Black boys and Black girls wanting to be police officers. They found joy in playing cops and robbers while arguing, because I saw my brothers do it, with one another because they wanted to be the police officer, to now children fearing the police. Mothers must educate their children on how to respond to police, and even witnessing death by force, creating a massive uproar after America was forced to watch George Floyd pass away. Policing has moved from a place of feeling like we are being protected to now we act like, or we believe that we have to protect ourselves from. And this fear that has amassed within our communities, leading to different protests and marches and just so much tension. How do we find relief amidst the tension? And so I'm so glad to have all of you here tonight, because each of you have, you know, you have served as a police officer at different times, or a detective at different times. And I really think that it's critical for us to just really look at what point in time did it really change? What I'd like for each of you to do, starting with Brother Berry, is to tell us a little bit about what was your role when you were a police officer with the Toledo Police Department. And yeah, we'll start there. Just a little bit about what was your role? What did you do?
Well, if I could back up a minute, I'd like to start off by saying I've been a police officer. I was a police officer 36 years. And you know, 36 years, I saw a lot of changes. When I came on, there was a need for Black police officers. And that need is still the same today, but back then it was even more so. And we were taught that you have to be respectful of the community for them to respect you. And that theory has always stayed with me all the time. As I look back over my 36 years, I would do it over again if I had the opportunity, because I experienced so many exciting experiences. But as we all know, and what you said just a while ago, is what happened to the respect that used to be out there for Toledo police officers. When I started the academy in October, I was so excited to join the police department. Prior to that, I was in the Air Force. I was a police officer, so I had some experience in police procedures and work. But yet I was excited about joining the department. One of our guest speakers today, retired officer Arthur Walker, has been on a lot more than I have, but he also experiences some things. And I recall an incident where my wife and I went to a party. And when I came in the party, several of the people started walking out. And I found out later the reason they were walking out, they could not trust me. Even though they knew me and knew what I was about, the fact that I was a black man in a uniform that could take them to jail. And over the years, that has stuck with a lot of people, that because I have on a uniform, I can misuse that authority that I have. I don't have power, I had authority, but that was enough that they gave me the respect to leave and go outside. If they're gonna do something illegal, at least they knew that I was not around. So over the years, this same concept has been there among young people who see on TV, and what they see on TV, they imitate out in the community. And this goes back way back when I was a young police officer on the street. Respect over the years has dwindled away because our parents have allowed young people to do what they want to do when they want to do it. And that is so important nowadays, that you can't assume that what you're doing is right. You have to know that it's right. And as a retired police officer, I learned that over the years. Later on, we'll talk a little bit about a program called Safety City, and it involves getting young people involved in the community. If I had one wish, if I really could, I would go back on the police department just to work again at Safety City, because it was such a rewarding experience. See young people come to Safety City not having any idea what it's like to see a police officer close up, and to see that we don't have tails, that we do know how to put one foot in front of the other, know how to hold a conversation. So with that thought in mind, they're sent to Safety City. It's not mandatory, but we encourage over the years to have that one-on-one conversation with parents, with grandparents. And now when I start with Safety City, I was a parent. Now I'm a grandparent who goes back to see some of their young people graduate from Safety City. But if I do it over again, I would, without a doubt, become a police officer, knowing that what you see on TV is not always what police work is like in general, but it's there for entertainment. Entertainment that sometimes boys and girls get misconstrued as being the right thing. So I'm appreciative of the opportunity to speak on that matter and to listen to my fellow officers express themselves and how they see police work these days.
Thank you, Brother Barry, for that. Brother Walker, can you share with us, as a retired police detective, what tell us a little bit about your role on the police force. Did you start off as a police officer, moved your way up to a detective? Tell us a little bit about you and policing.
I like to say now that community policing was very important back then. And when I say community policing, interacting with the community, I can remember when I came on in the 60s, walking a beat. I would be taken out and dropped on the east side to walk a beat, walk in the community, interact with the neighbors there. And I can remember the children in that particular area that I would hit my beat and start walking, and they would be looking for me to come, and they would walk like 2 or 3 blocks with me, just talking and conversation wise, and they weren't afraid of me. I felt like I was family to them, and they looked forward to it. We don't have that interacted with the neighborhoods now. I can remember back then, you used to see police cruisers coming down through your neighborhood and waving and just having conversation with the neighbors. You don't see that interaction now. And what inspired me to become a police officer, I remember, he's deceased now. He was my mentor, Eddie Turner. He was up on the door in Heston there, and he was in that police car. It was shiny, all had it clean, man. And he was going down Door Street, waving his hand out the windows, and everybody say, "Eddie, Eddie, Eddie." And I said, you know what? I said, that might be a cool job to have. I said, you respect it. And it was an honorable position to have. People looked up to you as a police officer. They it was like you were part of their families. But now you don't have that now. You have this animosity towards police officer and distrust with police officer. And it's just a strange situation now. And I think back in the day, police people were more respected back then than they are now because of, I think the news media has a lot to do with it. And the policemen now are on edge. They don't feel like they're needed or respected. And that has to change. And I can attest to the fact that during this time, being a police officer, as Brother Barry stated, I was proud to be a police officer. I took honor in it. I wanted to do good. I just wanted to help the elderly, help the children. And they used to request, I used to go over to the schools and talk to the kids when I was a detective. And it was just a different atmosphere back then. And then I walked a beat, I think for about 3 to 4 years. And then I was promoted, I got in a patrol car. And then from that, I was promoted to the Detective Bureau. I worked Vice Metro for 14 years. During that time, and in the interval, I also worked recruitment, not necessarily recruitment, but I did in investigations for cadets coming on the police department. And we just had a camaraderie with the public back then, but now it's a lot different now. And but as Brother Barry stated, I cherished those years. I enjoyed being a police officer. But now I have some reservations about whether or not I would want to be a policeman nowadays. And thank you.
Thank you. And that's so understandable. I can understand where you're coming from. And I could also see the joy of you being able to think back on those days. So thank you for even sharing that with us. Retired Officer Gary Burks, what brought you to the police department? What was your role and what was policing like then? I know there's a difference between the ages of you and, Brother Walker and Brother Barry, but I also know that's a wonderful thing because we get to look at it in a different lens as well.
Well, actually, hello, everybody. But actually, it helped because those two gentlemen, I don't want to tell them this in front of them. They don't want them to get a big head, but I looked up to them when I came on the department. Yes, I did mess with them. I jug with them, and they was doing the same. But they were ones that showed me and told me by their actions and their words that you can come in, do the job, and still maintain your dignity and also respect those people around you. Those type of individuals helped me along the way throughout my career. Now, I came on the department in 1979, and I worked there for just under 30 years as active duty. So I've been retired 13 years now. During that period of time, I worked the streets and field operations. I'd also, as an instructor in the academy, I did do background investigations on people trying to come in and join the department. And I also did recruiting. But the majority of my time was in investigative services, where I worked as a detective, mostly in crimes against persons, which primarily I worked in robbery homicide. As a result, I unfortunately saw people at their worst. I saw people dealing with situations that was absolutely the worst time in their life, and that was something that we had to deal with. But I worked with a bunch of guys who actually tried to make sure that when we did our job, we still maintained respect for the individuals. Now, when you look at things today, I will say, quite frankly, it appears that the attitude has changed on both sides, with those on the department and also with the people in general. And a lot of it is mistrust and fear. Mistrust that the other side is not saying completely the whole truth, and fear because you just don't know what's happening. Social media has helped add to it. Social media is great on one hand, but also social media will take the negative and put that out. And it appears that the negative always outshines the positive, and people get hooked up to it. So they'll watch that and they'll base their opinions on that negative. But the thing is that being an officer, you have to be. Now, let me just tell you this. When I came on the department, I did not have a great desire to be on the police department. I was looking for a steady job with good benefits. As it turned out that I found a career. I went there and I found not only a career, I found a wife also. But I found a career and everything there just fell into place. And that's why I was able to do 30 years there, because it allowed me to interact with the community on all different levels. And we had a trust thing going back and forth, and I had great partners. Today, it just seems that nobody trusts each other on both sides. And whatever negative happens on both sides, that's what's put out there. And if you do that, then that's going to make it harder for you to bring in even new people. So it's been a great job. Has it changed? Yes, it's changed quite a bit. And I just think that a lot of it, the way it's changed on the department, is the same way it's changed in the world.
It's a powerful statement. Thank you for that. The evolution of things, and we'll get to that because that's powerful. Pastor Green, I know that in multiple conversations with you, one of the things that really gets to you is community violence. I like to call it lateral violence. That's something that I learned about, and I was like, yep, I think that's it. And this speaks to the fact of how people are in communities and because of the lack or the ability to really be able to get to those who you really want to get to, sometimes that violence turns inward into our communities. And so that lateral violence means that we're just we're constantly seeing violence in our communities and amongst one another. And so I hear you speak a lot about that. And can you share with me, Pastor Green, what is it about community violence that really, got you as a faith leader involved?
First of all, let me say thank you, Bishop, for inviting me. And I seem to be the least of these on this platform. I want to say thank you to the officers for your great service. And if you noticed anything in my record, please let me finish what I'm going to say before you arrest me, because if I did anything wrong, it's a statute of limitations. So that's well behind me. But I really want to say that I appreciate officers. I understand your plight. And I want to also say that when it comes to what's going on in the community, I don't think that we should put the burden on police officers. Not totally, and there's quite a bit that they've done that's positive. Here's my issue with not just the policing, but with what's going on community-wise when it comes to violence, is that we don't have enough people at the table. We don't have a village. Police officers are only one component, one entity within the village, and it takes a village to raise a child and to change this whole situation. That means you need every able body. You need the mayor at the top. You need the school system. You need you need mental illness, the parents, the church, the whole 9 yards involved in this effort. And I see that police officers are doing what they do. But again, as I said, the whole attitude within the community has changed towards police officers, as well as the attitude of police towards the community. Therein, there needs to be some sort of change, and that happens with dialoguing and coming together. One of the things that I think that one of the reasons why we talked about the change in the community is that parents have set the tone for these young people in terms of their reactions or actions towards officers. When I was coming up, you had to respect them. I got in my mind as one police officer named Pete. And I know that this kind of police officer is pretty much gone for the most part, but Pete was a whistling police officer. He was always found whistling and being cordial and that sort of thing. And I understand the atmosphere is a bit more dangerous now than it was yesterday. And so there is a lot of caution and precaution. The community has to realize too that officers are our friends for the most part. And what can we do to kind of undo this friction between the officer and the common citizen? One of the things that I've done in my area is I've made a decision to meet with the police officers who were in my area and tell them what kind of a job they were doing, to shake their hands. Irregardless of all of this other stuff going on, the media has a way of blowing everything out of proportion and making everybody look like the bad guy. And so I've tried to find a way to kind of combat that kind of attitude, even on Facebook. There's been questions as to if you saw a police officer down, what would you do? I've imagined having to run and rescue a police officer in my mind. I said, and hopefully he understands I'm rescuing him and the rest of his party does too, because they are important. In years ago, in the Black communities, police officers were looked at as being, even though we were cordial, but they were looked at upon as being snitches. You couldn't trust them. You didn't know what, so you kept everything to yourself. But now, as we progress in this violence and our children are being killed and killing one another, we have to stand back and say, what are the benefits of having protection? And begin to kind of dialogue about that with each other and with the police force. I think the police force they're doing positive things, but we don't see that. We don't highlight that. We highlight the negative. And so there needs to be a conversation between the community and the police department. Now, in my church, I've got 2 retired officers. I've got 1 dispatcher. And so our people are pretty much aware of the relationship that we should have with the police. And so in my church, it's sort of like singing to the choir, and perhaps in many churches, it's sort of like singing to the choir. So I think that's part of what needs to happen, this conversation to reverse this mentality that police officers are all bad and so forth. I think also one of the things that if I were a police officer, and I would try to be one today if my health allowed it, is that there needs to be an example of fairness. The media picks up on this, but you also know that there is an unspoken law that you can get away with doing certain things to other folk, like your own folk. But when it comes to the other race, you're going to be in trouble. And so you see us kind of attacking each other because there's an unspoken message that says that that's okay. and now it's running rapid, and we don't know how to pretty much fix it. But I would say that there needs to be more of an example of being fair. Fair. Whenever an incident comes on the television, the news is reported, nobody says it. But the first thing you want to know is, are they black or are they white? And you're looking at the treatment of how they're treated. The other conversation, and I'm just trying to talk about what I'm talking about, is this disposition within the black community that other people get away with things, so we can too. At some point, that needs to stop, and it can stop with the fairness being exhibited, and we don't have to have these conversations or these arguments about, well, they got away with it, so why can't I? If it's wrong, it needs to be dealt with. From the church's perspective, I think that we can start doing something with the policing community that would show us worshiping together. And I mean, I'm not just talking about a handful of black cops worshiping in black churches, but I think across the board, wherever we are, just show some sign of unity and coming together. And that would make, I think that would make a big difference. But again, I'll just close by saying that the police force is just a drop in the bucket. There's a whole big team of people in this city that needs to be brought together with the police force as a part of it in order to deal with this large thing of violence in this city.
Thank you, Pastor Green. I'd like to welcome to the stage, he had to get here a little late, but I'd like to welcome Officer Donald Scott to the stage. Hi, Officer Scott. Thank you for joining us. What we're doing now is really just setting the stage for the before and the after in Black policing. And so what I've asked each person, we have 2 retired detectives, 1 retired police officer, and 1 pastor. And basically just asking what made you want to become a police officer? And I know that you are currently serving as a police officer. And then what I want to do after that is really get into, after you tell us a little bit about what you do and what made you get onto join the police force, I'd like to really start kind of, I guess, unpacking some of the things that I've just heard. So Officer Scott, please, by all means, tell us a lot about you. You're on mute. You're on mute, Officer Scott.
Okay, can you hear me now? All right, sorry about that. Yes, I am Officer Donald Scott. I'm currently serving on Toledo Police Department. I have been appointed since 2003, so roughly almost 19 years now. My current assignment is I am at Community Services, and what we do there is we try to address persistent neighborhood issues and our problems using alternative means of rather than just citing and or arresting people. We try to get to the root cause of the problem and come up with a sustainable solution to that issue. And that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you. It sounds like you all are looking at some forms of like mediation, community mediation.
To a degree, yes.
Or restorative practices. So that's great. Again, I want to thank everyone. And so now I've been nice. Now I have to just put on my hard hat. There's something that I thought was really powerful. He said, you don't have power. What you have is authority. And what we're seeing is a misuse of authority. What I also heard is that contributing factors to the way people today have fear and mistrust is because of media and social media. There's also been, if I heard correctly, kind of like, well, it starts at home. So part of it is like the parent, and the child comes out, which kind of warrants a police officer to show up the way that they show up. And then I heard about, we have to communicate. We have to communicate. And, but the question that I'm left with is, if we have fear and mistrust, how do you communicate? How do you build that bridge so that you can communicate? Brother Walker and Brother Barry, spoke about being, walking the beat and how it was relational then. My question to each of you, and I'll start with you, Brother Burks, is how do we get back to that point when there's so much mistrust and fear?
That's the $1 million question. I agree with you. One of the things is the fact that you have to be willing to have that communication. If you're not willing to do it, then it's already a dead issue before you get started. But you have to be able to come in and be willing to look at yourself in a way that says that, okay, everything I'm doing is not 100% right. So that's a hard thing for people to do, to look at themselves and say, well, but I'm part of the problem. Well, you have to be able to identify that in order to be part of the solution. That's, I believe that it is. So the communication has to go back and forth both ways. But, and I believe this is pretty important, it has to be truthful communication, and it has to be in a situation or in an environment where you feel safe, where is my communication is not going to get me in trouble. You're not going to take what I say and use it against me. But it's something that we want to turn around and have something for the good of all. And that's, in a nutshell, is hard because, so I guess I'm saying I don't have the 100% all the way answer. But I do believe that communication has to start at a level where people are talking with each other and they're talking truthfully. And they have to be able to be in a safe place in their mind and their environment to realize that what they say will not be used against them. And let me just add this. You're absolutely right. This is not a something that you can just gloss over. When you have pictures of officers reacting in ways that, and I'll tell you right now, that none of the officers or retired officers right here would agree with. We feel that, and people don't understand, you have to understand that we don't want to work with somebody who's going to do that type of thing. We don't need anybody that's there, because that's making it hard for everybody. We don't need that. We don't want that. And it's just not right. And we have to deal with it in that particular way. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Officer Scott, you are in, you just mentioned that you do, you are a community service officer. Do you find it difficult to talk to the community? What is your relationship like with the community? Again, because there's so much fear and mistrust, and then people don't feel safe.
Yes, at times it is sometimes difficult to talk to the community. One thing that I always try to remind the citizens when I am communicating, speaking with them, is that, hey, I'm a person as well. Yes, I may wear this badge. Yes, I may stand with this uniform on, but I am a person. I have feelings, and I understand, and I have empathy for you and your situation. And we're trying to help come to get a solution and a resolution to whatever has caused me to have this interaction with you today. So if you can speak with me and be upfront and honest, I'll do the same to you. And sometimes getting on that level with the person will allow you more access, and they'll feel more comfortable and more readily able to come and give you the information that you need to complete whatever it is that you're doing that day.
Thank you. Brother Walker, and then I'll go to Brother Barry. I think, we're hearing the present tense of things. Understanding that you walked the beat, you said, for like almost 4 years, and Brother Barry, you can speak after Brother Walker. You worked with children. And so there was a relationship there. My question to you, to the both of you, starting with you, Brother Walker, was it what's different? What was different then that we don't see now that allowed you to build that relationship? And like you said, to, police car could drive down the street and wave their hand and people didn't have a problem waving back. You're right. I remember looking at a video and some people thought it was funny where a little girl was driving one of those Power Wheel things. And there was a police officer that walked past her and she jumped off of her Power Wheels, little black girl. She jumps off of her Power Wheel and she's running and she's dragging her Power Wheel. But the point of the matter is fearing at such a young age. And so I'd like to know, what is the difference between now and then?
Well, back then, you didn't hear negative talk about a police officer. I didn't hear that talk in my home. My parents, I was raised in a 2-parent home. And I never heard, I was raised in the projects in Albertus Brown. We had a policeman that walked in that area and he commuted. He was a security, but he had a badge and he had a gun. So we said he was a police officer. So we just felt a camaraderie. We just felt a closeness to him. His name was Ben. We call him Officer Ben. And we just felt connected to him. And back, like when I was telling you about walking a beat, you interacted with people and they get to see you as not as a police officer. They see you as a person, see you as a father or uncle image. And they didn't think negative things about you back then. And it was just different. It was a different atmosphere back then. But now it's a lot different. And I don't know how you can go about. I'm a strong advocate for community policing. I don't know if it will work now or not, but we had certain districts that we would walk, like District 13, that would be over door in Detroit. We would walk over there, 2 police officers, walk in the neighborhood and interact with the people. And believe it or not, when you set up this relationship in these areas, people will come to you and tell you about different illegal activities that's going on. And they'd be more protective of the police officer back then. But now it's just a different mentality, entirely different. And I don't know where it can start. I think education-wise, maybe they should have this in the school system. I think that would be a good place to start. Have policemen go in the classes, in the schools, and start talking and interacting with these students and these kids. I think that would be a good starting point.
Unfortunately, but they are in the schools. They're called school resource officers. And unfortunately, children have had bad experiences where, kindergartners were getting handcuffed for acting out, for being a child. Kids have hard days too. And so the fear starts young, unfortunately, because school resource officers or police officers are inside of the schools, not to build a relationship, like you were talking about. But, just these ways that could be helpful maneuvers are still, they're harmful, which is, again, like you said, Brother Walker, it's unfortunate. Brother Barry, I know you mentioned a program earlier that really brought in the youth. So I'd like to hear a little bit about that, because right now you can't bring in the youth. I remember growing up, one of the things that I really liked as a parent and even as a child was we used to have the police athletic league, and they paid for sports and activities for children who were living in disadvantaged communities, but it gave them something to do all year round, starting with soccer and football and bowling and different things like that. And the little girls got to learn how to cheerlead and to, just to be active. We're missing some of that. But could you speak about like how, from your experience in building relationships, especially with children now, and them not fearing, to now children are fearing? I mean, how do you bridge that gap?
It's a little bit difficult to bridge that gap when you have parents watch TV with their children and things they shouldn't be seeing. They see them and they emulate those things. Art was talking about a program that we used to do. I was a school resource officer, except junior high or high school. I was in elementary schools. And it's so rewarding to see a child come into the program as a pre-kindergarten, go through the 8-day program, and come out with a smile on their face, tell mom and dad, I'm not scared of police anymore, that they're really nice people. And that's true. But when you watch TV, you get an entirely different image of a police officer. Other programs, I realize that Chief is under financial strains to put officers back in the schools. Right now we have a school resource officer, but they're not addressing themselves to some of the problems which could be addressed if they could talk to them as kindergarten or first graders, because that's where you really need to see as far as how they attitude towards the police officer. And so many of them come take the city, and they are scared. I mean, really scared of police officers, because the only thing they see is mom and dad do something wrong, police come in, take them to jail. That's all they see. They don't see the positive side of a police officer. I wish eventually the chief could have the manpower to put them back in the school to talk to younger kids, 6th graders on down. Some of these 6th graders are out there selling drugs and doing all kinds of things because there's no guidelines from the home front to steer them in the right direction. If we could get more programs back in the schools to address these situations where they see a police officer in a positive role model, it may cause them to go down a narrow path. And in junior high school and high schools, they have a school resource officer, but he or she is there more or less to keep the fights down and find hidden weapons, more so than actually being there to have speakers come in to talk about drug issues, talk about gang issues, things that are really on people's minds. But again, it's going to take manpower. I know the manpower is not there. But it also involves the almighty dollar. Somebody say, well, if I give you this many students that work here, will you promise to give them a job over here? You can't promise somebody something if you can't deliver it yourself. So be upfront, different leaders of organizations. Be upfront. Be willing to step back and look at things and try to remedy the situation to make things better. I was blessed to, again, work at Safety City for over 22 years. And you never realize how much a child misses not wanting to wave to a police officer. We had a special wave where you, like that, it means you cross at the corner. But after a while, somebody, rather than raise 2 fingers, they raised 1 finger. Because again, they thought that was smart. They raised up 1 finger rather than the 2 for the police officer putting the hand wave. So again, if we could get more programs available in the schools to reach those 6th grade on down, it would help to, before they do get in trouble with the school resource officer, they're willing to sit them down and explain to them what's wrong and what's right. And if I could say a little footnote on that, one of our speakers, Gary Burks, and I have something in common. You probably know what I'm going to say is there was an opening, there were several openings on the department. One was for the police academy, and one was for a school resource officer. So I put in a bid, and I got the bid, And come Monday morning after everything has settled down, I was to report to the police academy. And I did. And when I walked in the door, the lieutenant said, "Earl, here's your nameplate. See you later." I stood there for a second and he sort of smiled and I smiled. He said, "No, I'm just joking." What it is Gary Burks has already been through the police academy. He's trained in it. So we're going to switch you two guys where he'll go to the Scott Park as a school resource officer, grades K through 6, and you go out to the academy. So they flipped that back around again. And thanks to Gary, he helped me to work longer because I had such a good job at being a safety city. So thanks again, Gary, for looking out for me. You didn't know it, but you did. But again, it's that camaraderie is good. And sometimes as Black police officers, we don't have the same camaraderie as white police officers. And I saw that also. It's not that somebody did anything wrong, it's how we approach a situation different than somebody else. But the help is there. These agencies who are seeking money, when they get the money, they don't put it to the right program. They should do more to reach out to young people and say, "Look, I'm here to help you out."
Thank you for that. You know what again, there's always these running themes, but one thing that you raised, that you just said about the difference between Blacks and whites, and really a lot of the mistrust has come because we have seen on television, as you said, and as you all have said, and through media, how white police officers have consistently killed Black people. Again, as I said earlier, America was forced, we had no choice to watch George Floyd die. And, you know, I can't help but go to the point of the question around racism. You know, I want to talk about, you know, and so when I think about, I think some of you have said that you did some assessing for police officers. I can understand that that's a mental state. And a lot of times, you know, some of us can kind of play that role with a good mental state of mind for a little while. But how has racism impacted policing today? And I'm going to ask that question to you, Officer Scott. If it's a conflicting question that will yield problems, I can respect that, and I can alter the question.
Before we go to that, can I respond
please, if you could alter it a little.
Okay.
Yeah, because that could have
no problem. I respect that. Okay.
Before we go to that, can I want to just jump in on this issue of communication, which we started with before, and that seems to be one of the solutions to turn things around. As we talked about the media is communicating. That's how we've gotten to where we are. And I think that communication, to begin with, it's the first step to making some changes. The question is that Officer Burke raised is, how do we do it safely? I would not want to send an officer into a group where there's going to be a conversation unless it was safe. Because you know that tempers are going to fly and all of that. It's not safe for police officers to just go it alone. It needs to be pretty much a setup for them communicating. So what came to mind for me is town hall meetings where there's officers, there's a community, and there's some conversation around real talk. Of course, there has to be somebody who is a good moderator to keep this thing in perspective, but I think that's the first step. You meet oftentimes, you meet a lot of people, and you have these sentiments about them, mainly because you don't know them. But once you get to know them, then that's different. And I think that off of the town hall meetings, the officers can also go and have their own meetings to say, okay, what just happened? What did they talk about? What's wrong with us? What do we need to fix? And have their meetings, as well as the community have their meetings about what we need to do to be supportive of each other. And I think until we have that conversation, we can set up all kinds of programs, but if you're not getting the support from the families, if you're not getting the support from the communities, then what good is the program? It's just another program. So I think that we need to have some major conversations about where we are with our community in terms of violence and our police officers. I think that'll make that's a start.
Could I jump in real quick?
You may jump in, please.
Okay, first of all, thank you for respecting Officer Scott. He's in a situation that, could create, difficulties. But here's the thing. When you talk about racism, the biggest thing about racism is the fact that that's not just on the police department. Right now, in the state of mind of our country right now, racism is a base for a lot of things that's going on. And you find people who have come out of the workworks and they say, I'm not a racist. So I'm not here to try to say somebody's a racist, but I'm saying that their actions may dictate differently than what they're saying. But the thing is this, racism a lot of times it comes out because it's going to look at somebody as inferior or superior to somebody else because of the color of the skin. And a lot of times they will fall back on that as the catch-all because they have some inferiority complex on some things. Also, racism, as we all know, didn't just happen. It's been going on as long as you have people. So as long as you have people, you're going to have to deal with it. And the biggest part about it is you have to deal with it honestly. You have to be able to say that we have to look at it in such a way that it is there and quit saying, no, we don't have it happening here, because it is happening everywhere and on all different types of levels.
Well stated. Thank you so much. As I'm hearing and Pastor Green, it reminds me of the time, your comment reminds me of the time when we had Chatting with the Chief. I think you remember that, Brother Walker and Brother Berry, where we first started with Chief Moton and he came around to the churches, and Chief Moton broke down and cried one day. And I remember saying to him, that's what people need. They need to see you in your human form, not just your uniform. And so what I'd like to do in this next 10 or 15 minutes, because we can talk about the problems all day long. We know what the problems are. We really do. What I'd like to do, because we are at a crossroads where there is so much grief, so much pain because of so much loss on so many levels, that mistrust is on all kinds of levels. And we're seeing it today play out with vaccines and policing, you name it, because everything has been politicized. and politicized and heightened, excuse me. So I'd like to unpack just a little bit, because you always have to have a place to start. Why always bring the problem if you don't have a pen and paper to begin to develop the solutions? So building off of what Reverend Green said, understanding the fact that currently Officer Scott is in community services. What are some of the ways that we can, and I mean small ways, because this is not going to be by leaps and bounds. What are some of the small steps that we can begin to do? I understand that there's some alternative things to not arrest people, which is great. But what are some of the other things that can be done to begin to, I would call it, to begin to create a community plan to heal and to get back in relationship where there can be some trust? Because at the end of the day, as you all have said, every police officer is not a bad police officer. They only show, like you said, media and social media kind of heightens things. So of course, Officer Scott, I want to turn it over to you. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you for that question. And one thing that I try to do, and when I'm talking to young young people, mainly young men and young men of color in our community. I'll often field the question from them why we're treated the way we are treated, and things need to change. And so then I try to put it back on them, and I remind them that, the way things change, they're oftentimes small, they're incremental, it takes time. Things don't get the way they are overnight, they don't change overnight. A lot of times people want a wholesale change. And I tell them, no, I said, what you have to do is you have to be the change that you want to see. So if you're not happy or like the way that the police are treating you within your community, then you take the test, you get on the job, and you start treating people the way that you want to be treated. And I said, when enough of us do that, then we'll start to change the department from the inside out, not from the outside in. Because that's how change is going to affect, and that will create lasting change within our communities.
Thank you. That's been mentioned. Sure. Come on, Brother Walker. I was going to come to you. Mm-hmm.
But I know the mindset of people has to change. But when you communicate with people and talk to people and treat them, my philosophy, like I teach my children, I said, treat other people like you like to be treated. That is sound logic there. That's biblical. Treat other people like you like to be treated. And police officer, I can attest to the fact that while on the police department, and some people might take affront to it, but I've never seen a partner of mine abuse or misuse a citizen. In the 27 years I was on the police, you might say that's not true. It's true. Because for me as a police, I can remember them bringing a prisoner into the safety building in a paddy wagon. And this black was handcuffed up in the back of the paddy wagon. And he was defiant. He wasn't going to get out of the paddy wagon. I went up there and I said, you're contained. You're secured. Get up and come on. Just come with the police officer. You can't win. I said, come on out of the paddy wagon. Because I believe they would have gone to drag him out of there. But I wasn't going to be a witness to that. And he did. He complied. He didn't resist. He came on out, and they took him on up and booked him on the 5th floor. But make a long story short, if you are a police officer and you see another policeman abusing someone, you can call a snitch or whatever you want to call it. I would take it to my higher command, which would be a sergeant. You have a command structure in the police department. I would take it to my sergeant and I would snitch. I would tell him that he abused it, but I never witnessed that while I was on the police department. I don't know about the other officers on this call, on this Zoom, but I have never witnessed it. And I was on the police department 27 years.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. And that's a key point. You have to treat people the way that you want to be treated. And again, I think a lot of these things are easier said than done. And, we're in a difficult position because you don't know what first steps to take. You don't know what to say. People don't know how to hear and receive because it's so much trauma. And one of the things that I did learn when I majored in, when I got my master's degree in criminal justice administration, I began to realize that there are certain services that police officers don't get. Now, I am not in favor, and I have fought, for criminal justice reform. I have fought for rehabilitation over incarceration. I have fought against police brutality. There are a lot of things that I just cannot stand for and with. But at the same time, I do understand that, and I think this was said earlier, that there's two sides to this coin. And trauma lies on both sides. I think that what we see in some of these problems is that those issues are really bleeding into the communities, and it's bleeding into the communities in such a way that it's harmful, you know. And so I don't even really know how again, I'm at a loss for words, because when it's bleeding into the community in such ways that people are, they're pushing hard. And we know that they're saying defund the police and, all of those things, and put services in other places. How do we do that? How do we get to a point of having some of the services to help people like who are current police officers to respond to, have proper policing to respond to mental health? How does the church, because I know you have something to say, Reverend Green, how does the church also come and move from maybe pastoring to maybe chaplaincy, community chaplains to show up on the scene? There has to, because people are distrustful of the church. Let me just keep it real. People are distrustful of the church as well, because of some of the harms that has happened in the church, especially a lot of our younger people. So when we look at the fact that things are changing, and I think Brother Burke said this, is the evolution of things. And this evolution has changed in such a way that we have to reimagine policing, churching, and how do we begin to filter through this to at least have a small pocket that we can build from, so that we can build from the inside out.
So when you talk about the police in the church, it goes back to my original conversation. Police in the church are minuscule when it comes to the village. That's why you can't put all of the solution on the police nor the church. You're not even going to make a dent in this thing if those are the only people in the village who are part of this conversation or part of this solution. I go back to communicating. In communication, and it's very simple. Everybody wants to know what's in it for me. When we first got on this, this Zoom, I guarantee you nobody looked to see how everybody else looked on the Zoom. You were concerned about your own appearance. And so it's human nature for people to say, what's in it for me? Now, when it comes to rewarding these young people, the problem is that the solution that I heard given, it takes too long. These kids are growing up overnight, and they don't have 10, 15 years to see the benefits or the fruits of their labor. They've got to see some fruits of labor presented by us. We have no plan as a city. We have no plan as the leadership. We have no program. We have no process. We have nobody working together. Everybody's doing something, spending a lot of energy, no synergy, no togetherness. And so you don't have data, you don't have anything, and you cannot make promises to young people until you have something to put in their hands, to redirect them. Playing basketball and swimming during the summer, that ain't enough. They need careers. They need motivation. They need to go on and realize that they can do something with their lives, and we're not providing that. Now, conversation is for old folk. We like to talk. We do that very well. But who is collecting the data? Who is, after we finish the conversation, putting together the teams? What are the teams? Who's working together? We can go back to the church. That's almost like singing to the choir. That's the same thing. The people who need to be reached are not even at the table. We're talking about them, but we don't even have at the back of our minds, everything that we're mentioning primarily is for good kids. It works for them. But what about the ones who are out there, who have lost hope, who have no sense of direction, who is creating this? The chickens have come home to roost, is what it is. And I think that we need we need the village. We need a conversation, and we need to go to the table with what's what's benefiting, what's going to benefit the community for being a snitch, for telling on folk. How has the police force blessed you? We need some testimonies. Everybody's been in a situation where you needed an officer and you were glad he got there. Until you looked at the news and saw somebody else's situation. So I think it all begins with some serious dialogue and conversation.
Well, Reverend Green, you said that, and I heard you. And you also said something else. And so here, we're building the village. I'm not looking for I don't think, and I agree with you, it's not all on the church. It's not all on the police. It's on all of us. But we have to start healing somewhere and in some place. Something has to not be bandaged, but it can be sutured, but given enough air so that it can heal. And so I agree with you. I think what we're trying to unpack here is who's going to be the ones that say, here am I, to take the first steps, because community or the village is dealing with so much apathy, so much despair. If I have to choose between coming to a community town hall meeting and feeding my children, I have to feed my children. We're having to make hard choices in so many different ways. And so for me, as the next step, because I'll take you up on that offer. And I'm quite sure everybody else, that's on this panel, and hopefully some of the listeners will reach out and say, okay, I'll take you up on that offer. How do we begin to plan? Not preach, but how do we begin to plan, to prepare? Because I agree. What's the inheritance that we want to leave our children? Each one of us, I believe, is a grandparent. What's the inheritance that we want to leave our grandchildren? Because we already know what our children are into. What's the inheritance that we want to leave our children and our children's children? And the truth of the matter is the village has to heal. So how do we heal the village? How do we bring down the fires? And we can't do it all at once. But where do we begin? How do we get into relationship, a deeper relationship with Officer Scott, having the wisdom of Officer Burks and former Detective Burks and former Detective Walker and retired police officer Earl Berry? How do we support? How do we blend together to have a deeper conversation while also being honest and transparent enough to not make the community feel like they're the blame for what's going on, but to understand accountability is on both sides?
Is that a question that's directed towards anybody?
Not you. Not you. You already said your piece.
Okay. Okay.
But no, I believe, I'm just messing with you. I would say, I would give everybody, 2 minutes, 2 to 3 minutes, because, the thing about it is this: so much has bled over into the hearts of people, and there's so much pain, and you're trying to sift through all of that pain. Brother Walker, there's something, we need you to move your head over a little bit, please. How do we do this? Because you're right. We need to start somewhere in this conversation. And how do we do that?
Well, I'll say this real quick. I think whatever meeting or gathering we have, there's 2 words that needs to be prominent, and that is, I care. There's a lot of problems we can talk about. We can get into finger pointing and stuff like that that's not being done. But I think the premise of the meeting should be centered around the notion that we care. And I think if that's the dominant thought, that would control the conversation or make it a bit more wholesome.
We care. And I think that's that running thing. We care. And so using that as a campaign premise or the preface to building the village, how do we begin? Let's put this plan together. How do we begin? What's some of the first steps? What do you think should be in one of the first steps in We Care, Brother Burks?
Oh, I knew you was gonna come to me next. I wish I had the quick, easy answer, but I don't. I believe that We Care has to start with yourself. You have to eternally say that there is a situation, there is a problem. Am I going to be part of the problem, or am I going to be part of the solution? That's an old adage that folks have said, but it's still true to this day. And so I just believe that we'd have to be willing to talk with people, willing to put ourselves out to show people, and to make those appearances to say that, hey, we are here. We all have our flaws. We all have these things we have to work on, but let's work on them together.
Well said. Brother Barry, you're on mute.
Oh.
You're off mute now. You're back on mute.
Can I speak?
Okay.
There you go, Brother Barry. You're off. Sure, right after Brother Barry, Brother Walker.
I think if we were to take a poll and ask some young people, what does it mean to have a village to raise a child? They would know what you're talking about. A village, we mean a village, raise a child. So different things like that, where if they had parents that at home ask these questions, what does it mean to raise a child in a village? What about gun violence? So much gun violence. And what's so sad is blacks killing blacks. And what can we address ourselves to? What programs does the chief have in mind already, or willing to initiate as far as the amount of guns in the community? They're taking guns off the street. Well, for every one gun that's taken, maybe two is stolen somewhere else to replace the one that was taken off the street. So we got to have parents who want to be more committed. And I know parents are scared to send their children to school. If you watch the TV, it's fear out there. But we have to get beyond that fear, work together as a neighborhood. It don't have to be a large block watch, but a simple neighborhood. Get together to address these problems. And let the children know that my mom and dad, they do care. They may be scared at times, but they do care. And if we start there somewhere along the line, that money that's coming to Toledo, millions of dollars, some of it should be set aside for programs for youth, for adults, and then not just those who can afford that. It should be addressed to everyone, because these problems is everyone's problem. So ask a child, what does it mean to raise a child? And get their response. Be surprised that their response would be, I'm not sure, but I'm willing to listen to you.
Thank you for that. So step 2, a poll. Brother Walker.
In response to Reverend Green, his comments about the town hall meeting, I think that's well, talk and conversation. But what follows talk and conversation? There comes the action. Something positive has to come out of that meeting, and then you put that into action. You should have a community of community leaders, clergymen, students, social workers, all coming together and have this conversation. But after this conversation, he's talking about data, take what data's taken. After that conversation, there's got to be some action. Because after that, you just have a talk after a talk after a talk, but nothing concrete come out of it. You got to take that baton and go further. And it's nice to have that conversation, but after that, you got to have an action. And that's all I got to say.
Thank you. Well said. Okay, Officer Scott, what say ye?
Well, let me think. Okay. I believe as part of the mantra of We Care, we'd have to, and I believe it's been mentioned before, about changing the mindsets of the people in the community. I really feel that in order to change things, you need to change the mindset and have people take ownership, whether they're purchasing their home, own their home, renting, or just visiting their grandmother. You have to take ownership And when you take ownership of something, it's not just what goes on in your home, but it's also what goes on around your home. So you're taking ownership of the neighborhood, you're taking ownership of the school system there, and you want to know what's going on, and you're actively engaged in what's happening there at the school, what's happening at the park up the street, you know, whether it be Savage Park, Smith Park, or whatever park you want to talk about. You know what's going on in your neighborhood, in your community, and you're able to help, you know, get back to some of what we used to have when we actually had neighborhoods. Now we just got communities. There are no real neighborhoods anymore. And I believe a lot of that is due to the fact that people don't take ownership of their own personal space anymore. They're just there for the moment and then they're moving on. I believe that would be a good place to start, taking ownership of everything around you.
Wow. Yeah, that's powerful. When you say we don't have neighborhoods anymore, we have community. And interestingly enough, when we talk about community, especially in the space of the work that I do, we talk about it in a way that it should be, you know, relational and in building. But when I think about a neighborhood, the first word is your neighbor. And I think we have also gotten away from knowing who our neighbors are. I knew everybody when I was growing up, and everybody knew me, and everybody watched out, you know, they cared. And so that's why I love the fact of bringing this forth, saying we care. Sometimes, you know, it's nothing wrong with getting back to some of the basics. And some of those basics look like support. Some of those basics look like if you don't have food, I'm not judging and talking about you. I'm bringing food to the table. What it looks like is, you know, if you see somebody struggling, you know, I always say never look down on somebody unless you're picking them up. Let's help to pick some people up. Let's help to, you know, because the first thing is, and someone said the first part of caring, as Brother Burke said, you have to start with you. So we also have to think about, how do we show up? Are we showing up in a caring way? Are we even showing up that we truly care? Because, you know, some people will say, how are you doing? They really don't care. They really don't care. So I've heard a lot, you know, and the big thing is we have to get back. One of the basics is there was a thing about curiosity. I wanted to know you. I wanted to know my neighbor. And that neighbor, it didn't matter. You know, neighbors watched out for neighbors. And they came together. They band together. This didn't just start. It just looks different because neighbors were organizing together a long time ago. They were building community and maintaining neighborhoods. And you said it right, Officer Scott. They owned, whether they were a renter or not. They took ownership in their community. They took ownership in being able to go to the schools. And unfortunately, there's some other work that has to be done in the we care efforts, because the systems such as the school and other systems also have to demonstrate that they care too, that they care about our children, that they care about parents, and that we're not judging. The church has to show that it cares. You know, we all have to show up. That's in my opinion, is how you build the village, is when you can show up for me in my darkest moment, in my weakest moment, and stand with me in my strongest moment without judging me, but loving me through my pain, my anguish, my hurt, whatever it is. It used to be a time that if it was a single woman, a male in the community shoveled the snow. Where has our help gone? Where has our care gone? And so, Pastor Green, we have a program under the We Care, a poll. Let's ask the youth about what does it mean to raise a village? What does that mean to them? Let's look at what about gun violence and the programs. Let's bring in the community leaders and the students and the social workers and the faith leaders and all of that. Let's talk about how do we create a new narrative that talks about we care. In other words, changing the mindset. How do we begin to not just beautify the neighborhood, but own the neighborhood all over again? And then after all of that, like Brother Walker said, when we become aware of what's going on, when we've done all of these things that we can do in the conversations of we care, let's go from being a noun to a verb. Let's take some action. Let's get to a place where we are in movement together. And when we can get back in rhythm together, because again, none of this is new under the sun. The difference is we didn't have the internet back then. The difference is we didn't have social media back then. The difference is technology was not the way that it was, but family had a meaning back then. And we have to get back to defining what is family. So I want to thank every one of you for this rich conversation. It always goes by so fast. I want to thank you, Brother Burks, Brother Walker, Pastor Green, Officer Scott, Brother Barry, for lending your voice to this conversation. I know for some people, it's not easy to hear these conversations because people want to see things one way. And sometimes when we want to see just the coin one-sided without any, we got the head, but we really is absent of the tail, then we really don't bring value to anything. And what I heard everybody say today is let's have a two-sided coin that has value. And that value is we value one another. And what I also heard is that we have people here who are saying, I'm ready to work and to push, to massage out the tensions so that we can bring value to our community. One conversation at a time and moving into action, one at a time. We can do this. It's been done before. We haven't lost anything. We've just kind of turned off the blinders because we've gotten tired. So what I heard you say today, Pastor Green, in saying we care is a call for us to awaken our senses all over again so that we can begin to activate some things that has been dormant because of everything that has happened. I want to thank you again, each, for bringing your voice into this space. I respect you for all that you have done in the past as police officers and in the present as police officers. I truly hope that people had an opportunity to witness you in different ways. Thank you, Pastor Green, for bringing your voice. And I hope that we have began to take away the sting and the poison of how people see policing and policing in our community and begin to heal so that we can go from poison to purpose. And we can only do this together. I want to thank Kara Solutions for all of the technical support that they give. If without them, we would not be able to have these conversations. I ask that everybody who was a part of this conversation, go to our YouTube page. There is a word. And like and subscribe to our page. Our goal is to have 100 subscribers. Also, go to our Facebook page, Black, and that's spelled BLAQUE, Women Rising. Please like our Facebook page, follow us. But there's also a QR code. And click on that so you can be added to our mailing list so that we can keep you abreast of what's going on with the We Care conversations. And if you'd like to join, just put on the Facebook page, put on the YouTube page, I Care, and we'll be sure to reach back out to you. I wish everyone a lovely evening. And I would just ask each of you to remind yourself that you do care. Have a good night.